When learning to program, every programming language has the same basic fundamentals. Those include a method of creating output, a method of storing data, a method of making decisions, a method of repeating blocks of code, and then something called functions. Now, functions are tasks that have been pre-created, either pre-created by the language, or you can actually make your own custom functions. So we are going to go through those 5 main concepts using JavaScript and do some examples of each. Once you are comfortable with those core building blocks, you can basically build anything, and it's also really easy to pick up a new language because the next language will have the same basic fundamentals. So in this video, we're going to look at creating output using JavaScript. There are a series of commands that allow you to create output using JavaScript. We're going to look at document.write, the alert function, and the console.log function. Now, on a small side note, the document.write command will allow you to add content to a web page. However, once you start using JavaScript practically, you don't often use the document.write command. Typically, you are modifying the web page. So you're loading content in or manipulating existing content. You're not really document.writing content to the web page. But this is a good example of a typical output command. And if you move on to a new language like Node.js or PHP or Python, then everything we're learning from reviewing the document.write command will apply. It's quite similar. So let's write some document.write commands. So let's create a new file, and I'm going to call it output.html. And let's start just by adding our standard HTML elements. Okay, and in these examples, I'm going to use internal JavaScript. So there's different methods of placing JavaScript into a document. There is inline, which is directly in a tag, internal, which is in between 2 script tags, and external, which would be a separate file. So to prevent flipping back and forth from multiple files, I'm just going to place my JavaScript directly into this document. All right, next let's add some JavaScript and some output to my document. So I'm going to open and close my script tag. And in between my script tags, I'm going to write my document.write. And then the output that I want to add, I place inside brackets and some quotes. So if I save that, and because HTML and CSS is a client-side language, I can test by simply opening that file with my browser. So there's my output with my hello world. Now, if I click Inspect Element and I look at my HTML, okay, you can see I have my title and I have the plain text here, hello world. So that document.write command literally added that text to this document. Now that hello world isn't well formatted, it should be formatted with HTML. So I should, when I'm outputting that, remember that the end result should be well formatted HTML. So I can wrap it with a paragraph tag, refresh, and we're not going to see much difference there. But now if I inspect and look at my HTML, you can see my hello world is now inside a paragraph tag. Okay, and now if I want to add something else, let's say a link to my website. Now here's where we're going to run into a problem. So you can see that the coloring in Visual Studio Code appears to be a little confused. This is the output that I want to create. However, if you look at the color coding, only that first piece appears orange. Now, when you're coding, especially with JavaScript and PHP and other language, even more so than HTML, the quotes are really important. Every open quote will have a closing quote. And it's very important that your code can tell which opening quote belongs to which closing quote. The more you code, the more you're going to hate quotes. So at this point, this appears to be my opening quote, and the browser is going to believe that this is my closing quote. Then we have another open quote and a closing quote. So how can I tell the browser that that is not the case? That this is my opening quote and this is the matching close quote. So there's a variety of methods to solve this. One, you can take these quotes and add a slash in front of them. This is called escaping a character. So I'm telling the browser that these quotes are not part of the code. They should be treated as plain characters. So then our JavaScript will add this text to the web page. When it's added to the web page, these slashes will be stripped out, and then I will have a well-formatted link. So if I save and refresh, I now have a link. And if I inspect element and look at my HTML result, you can see that the link here is well formatted, and those slashes that I put in my code have been stripped out. So those are only to tell the browser that the next character is just a plain text character, not a JavaScript quote. So one way at looking at this code is this is a JavaScript quote, this is an HTML quote, this is an HTML quote, and this is a JavaScript quote. This quote indicates the beginning of some text for JavaScript. This quote indicates the beginning of an attribute for my HTML. An alternative method is, for the most part, single quotes and double quotes are pretty interchangeable. So I could take out one pair of these and replace it with single quotes. And that would work as well. Now personally, I like my HTML to have double quotes. Just feels better. I sleep better at night. So I would prefer either to escape it, or you could actually use single quotes for the JavaScript quotes. Now there are times where you may need both single quotes and double quotes. So for example, if we were writing some sort of story, and we have someone named John who said, "I'm hungry." And let's wrap that in a paragraph. Now we have a problem here again where this quote appears to be the opening quote and this one now appears to be my closing quote. But I can't switch this quote to a single quote, then I would wreck my paragraph meaning. And I also can't switch this quote to a single quote because now we run into the same problem with this quote. So in that case, we either have to escape them using the slashes. So you can see when I add those slashes, the Visual Studio color coding gets corrected. Alternatively, you can also use a HTML special character for the quotes. And now if I go back to my browser and refresh, you can see that those quotes are still working. So most characters, definitely all characters that might cause a problem in your code, HTML has what's called a special character version. And you can use these anytime your character might cause problems. You can insert a special character and it will typically avoid the problem. Now you can't use a special character here because that is HTML code, but when it's plain content, it works fine. All right, next let's review two more methods of creating output. So another method of creating output, and we've seen this before, is using the alert function. This function creates output in a short, small dialog box. So if I go back and refresh my code, there's my output. And the last method we'll review is the console.log. All right, so with this output, if I refresh my page, we don't seem to see that output. And where this output shows up is inside my developer tools. So if I open up my developer tools, go to the console tab, we can see there's my message. Now, what good is a message in the developer tools? It's for developers. So as you're coding, you can use the console.log message to help track down bugs, to display messages that are basically only for you or anyone else working on the website. When you start using a lot of JavaScript libraries, you'll often get error messages in there that are quite helpful. For example, if I do have an error, let's just take a quote off one of my commands and refresh. Notice one thing, with that missing quote, none of my JavaScript work. So I don't see the paragraphs that I created, the alert, or my console.log. But I get an error message here. This one isn't quite helpful, but I can click on this link here and it'll tell me exactly which line is causing that problem. And also Visual Studio Code, you can see the colors there are also quite helpful. So now I can save, close those developer tools, and refresh, and we're back to some working output.